Today we're here at the Black Watch Museum in Perth. Join me as we reveal the brilliant history of the 42nd Regiment. I'm joined here with Alistair of the museum. Alistair, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us.
No problem at all, James.
Can you give us a quick rundown on the basic history of the Black Watch?
The regiment was formed in 1725 in 6 independent Highland companies that was organised by General George Wade. A number of the Highland chiefs got together after the 1715, 1719 Jacobite risings, and because the clan structure had basically been stripped out, it had become pretty lawless, and they wanted something to be done about it. And so you had the Monroes, the Grants, the Lord Lovat, the Frasers, and the Campbells, Macphersons, Macfarlanes got together and petitioned General Wade, and he then petitioned the king, and obviously it came back, and they formed the 6 companies to police the Highlands and get the thievery and murder dealt with. This they did in very small sections, anywhere from 4 to 30 odd men, spread all over the Highlands from Caithness right down into Perthshire, as far east as Braemar, and then obviously over onto Skye and that as well. 1739, it was formed into, it was regimented. Now Wade had actually been asked several times by other officers, senior officers within the army, to regiment the independent companies, and he didn't want to do that because there was such a valuable source to him up here. Eventually they were regimented and were the 43rd or Highland Regiment of Foot. They proceeded then to carry on with their original job, which was to police the Highlands until 1743, when they were marched down to London to be reviewed by the king. And unfortunately, there was a mutiny happened, under the strictest sense of the word. However, it was a misunderstanding of Gaelic culture and what they saw, and unfortunately there were rumours that were sent about that meant that the guys were led to believe that they were going to be sent overseas to the West Indies, and during those times, you went to the West Indies, you never came back because of disease and all the rest of it. So basically their idea was that you've not abided by your agreement, so therefore the agreement doesn't stand. And so they basically left and started making their way back up north. There is a list of mutineers, and I believe that there might have been about 10 or 12 that actually made it all the way back to Scotland. And the official records, it says they captured everyone. But it wasn't seen by majority of the army as being a mutiny, and it wasn't seen as a black mark against the regiment either. So it's one of these strange things that went on. The regiment had nothing to do with the Jacobite rising in the 45, and apart from 2 recruit companies that were shanghaied heading down to the regiment that was stationed on the Kent coast. And they were shanghaied for the Battle of Preston Pans, and because they hadn't even been trained, they were captured within minutes, and they spent the whole rest of the thing as prisoners of war. 1745, they fought the first big action, and it was the Battle of Fontenoy, which we've got a painting here. And the battle during that series of wars, the British Army was taking a hell of a hammering and the regiment guarded the retreat of the rest of the British Army at the time, and beat the hell out of the French, as per usual. And it made a hell of a real great name for itself because of this. Now, the painting here isn't quite accurate. So Hector Monroe of Fowlis, who was unfortunately killed at the Battle of Falkirk later on, was actually quite a corpulent sort of chap. And he'd had his horse shut out from underneath him twice, and I believe, and so he ended up standing on the battlefield. They fought in their old Highland way, whereby you see the discharge, the smoke from the musket, you clap the ground, or what we now call taking cover, which was against all the other rules of the way you fought warfare in the 18th century. And as soon as the discharge had happened, clap the ground, wait a second, up, run forward, and into them. So they were generally using broadswords and that sort of thing. But he stood throughout the whole battle, because any time he got down, it took two guys to get him stood up again. So he just stood the whole time and never had a wound at all. Like I said, he was killed at the Battle of Falkirk, and later on, end of 45, 46, beginning of 46. And at his funeral at Falkirk, every Highland chief turned up. He was that much of a respected man. So a great man, and he was the first commanding officer of the regiment. We then move on through that period whereby they were stationed, they were fighting raids on the French coast right up to, I think it was 1748, and then stationed back here. 1757 moves on, French and Indian Wars, and they ended up fighting at the Battle of Ticonderoga in 1758. This was a very important battle because, yet again, the British Army that was in North America was struggling against the French and couldn't take the fort. And the 42nd were given the task of trying to take it. They were recalled 3 times and ignored that, and they lost effectively 4/5 of the regiment at the time, and what was considered one of the last Highland charges. They were still using broadswords and still using the idea, you fire your musket, get rid of it, out with the sword and into them. And so that was a big turning point, because most of them, anyone that was still been in the regiment from when it was first formed, was basically killed. So you then got a big influx of new guys that had never been in the regiment before, and we also had a 2nd battalion, and it simultaneously as they were being sent down to Waterloo, the West Indies, to fight there, and that was another disaster really, because a majority of the men died of disease. And then they came back up, and they I'm trying to remember now, it was the Battle of Bushy Run. Yet again, the regiment got such a great name for itself because of the Battle of Bushy Run, and working with the 60th, the Royal Americans Regiment, who, by the way, later on had a piper in their ranks who had actually been in the Black Watch as well. And then in 1764 you have the reduction of the regiments, and everyone sort of comes home.
So Alistair, can you tell me some of the stories behind some of the items that are in this cabinet?
Yeah, well, James, this cabinet deals with the Battle of Katra and Waterloo. At the back you'll see what remains of the regimental colour that was carried at Katra and Waterloo. So we're pretty lucky to have these sort of things. Katra was the battle that was fought a few days before the Battle of Waterloo, and the 42nd took an absolute hammering there. As they were advancing up the slope, it comes up from the Katra crossroads. They were advancing through a cornfield, wheat field, and because of the slope and the height of the corn, they didn't see the French cavalry until they were actually right on top of them. And it was only once you've been on the battlefield of Katra, you understand why that happened. There's loads of stories about all sorts of things to do with that, but once you've been there, you do understand totally what happened. And it took them a long time because they were advancing in line to form square. Once they formed the square, they had French cavalry in the middle and had to clear it out. They went through 3 or 4 commanding officers in 20 minutes. The Grenadier Company Commander, Major Mingus of Weem, he had 27 lance wounds and still survived. He was known as Major Moore, as in the Gallic, the great major, the big major. That was his nickname. Another person who fought there and then on at Waterloo, is remembered in this little piece of wood here, which is the base drone stock, bottom stock of the big drone of a set of pipes. This was a young guy called Thomas Campbell, and he led the final charge of the 42nd at the Battle of Waterloo, having also been at Quatre Bras. He doesn't occur on any muster rolls, he doesn't occur on the medal rolls, and he only comes on to the rolls in 1818. The pipes were presented by the officers and that of the regiment, and it was signed off by the Duke of Wellington that this would be done. And the significant thing about him is he was 12 years old, and he didn't feature on the muster rolls because he wasn't 14, so therefore he wasn't yet a boy. And there would have been a number of these boys, children, serving in different regiments, and Wellington turned around, or the War Office turned around in 1818 and said that this has to stop. And then he would have been 14 at that point, so he then comes on, strangely enough, as an adult soldier, and he serves right through till I think about 1830 or 1828, and he dies out in British Columbia in the 1850s and is buried in Victoria in British Columbia. Unfortunately, the graveyard he is buried in is now a car park.
Oh.
As happens, things sort of get forgotten about and all the rest of it. But so quite a significant individual in my mind, and we haven't worked out yet whether he was actually given Waterloo medals or not. I suspect the regiment would have made sure that they did.
And are these examples of the Waterloo medals here?
Yeah, those are all originals. We've got quite a number of Waterloo medals and Peninsula medals and Egypt medals. Unfortunately, a lot of the guys with the earlier General Service Medal, it was called, missed out on them because they were only issued in 1847. So a lot of these guys, 47 years on, were unfortunately would have passed away. So, yeah.
I heard once as well, this was from another person that was informing with, was that there was actually a row at one point over the issue of medals. Supposedly, when they were issuing out the medals, the folk that fought at Waterloo were issued their medals first before the guys that fought at the Peninsula were awarded the medals first, and that's what caused people an outcry demanding, saying, well, if they've got a medal, why have we not got one?
It's quite possible. I haven't gone into it that far, but it wouldn't surprise me that actually happened. Waterloo, because Wellington was such a charismatic character, he made this, this is the greatest battle that was ever fought and all the rest of it. And so, guys got 2 extra years on their pensions, on the service and this sort of thing. And they come, as you can see, they're all the same medal, but they come with so many different configurations. And sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference between some, and like the number 14 and number 11 effectively are two different.
They look like two totally separate awards.
Yeah, absolutely. This case deals with the Crimean War, and most of the stuff in here is to do with Major Hackett of Pitferran, which is down near Dunfermline. The other interesting thing is you'll see just there a print of the famous painting called the Alma, forward the 42nd, of which you got General Sir Colin Campbell shouting the word of command, and General Cameron on his horse as well. But the artist at the time tried to get images of the faces of as many of the folk that he could at the time, and you'll see that there's a load of signatures there of the men that were actually there and in the painting. Hackett is the man carrying the Queen's colour, which is the Union flag. You'll see there in the sort of the middle ground. The drum, the Russian drum there, you'll see is in the left foreground next to the Russian soldier lying on the ground there. So we're quite lucky to have these pieces of equipment as well. Lots of bringbacks from there. Now, there's an interesting story about a piper there, a famous piper called Donald Bain, who was referred to as the Piper of the Alma, and another piper by the name of Mackintosh, Angus Mackintosh, I think it was, or Donald, doesn't matter. Anyway, Mackintosh had been away at the hospital and asked Donald Bain to look after his pipes. And when Mackintosh came back, a couple of weeks later, he went to blow up his pipes just to check they were okay, and he heard a load of squeaking. Took his pipes apart, and a family of mice ran out of the stocks. And word goes that him and Mackintosh was seen chasing Bain around the barracks, around the camp, for a good half hour, swearing and cursing at him because he'd put mice into the bag of his pipes. So you can see there that, a soldier, whether it be in 1850 or 1950 or 2050, is always going to be the same.
This is a man that myself and Darryl know very well about. He was a well-known person at the beginning of the 20th century with the Highlanders. There's so many places named after him in the area that we were brought up in, as well as his memorial and the remains of his family home. Can you tell us more about Major Walkup and the things that he had achieved and how he met his end?
Well, General Walkup is quite interesting about him because both him and his son both became generals. General Walkup here, he was a very distinguished officer and, you know, obviously progressed up to the rank of Major General. He was extremely well thought of, and he was considered one of these gentlemen that was going to be a commander of the army at the time. He was a contemporary of General Sir Hector MacDonald of the Sea Force, and you know, I think that era produced a lot of very fine officers indeed. He commanded the Highland Brigade, or was commanding the Highland Brigade in beginning of the South African War, the Boer War, in 1899. General Walkup was unfortunately killed in December of 1899 at the Battle of Marcus-Fontein. Very, very unusual for a general to be killed. The battle itself was a disaster, and mainly a lot at the time there were fingers pointed at Walkup's command, but it actually turned out that he was let down by the generals and staff above him with intelligence, and also by some of his brigade commanders as well beneath him, which, you know, an awful shame that he had to lose his life for it. And he's buried out in South Africa at Marcus-Fontein itself.
Alistair, this is one of my most favourite parts of the museum. This is the section about the First World War. Can you talk us through some of the amazing items that you've got here on display?
Yeah, James, well, the first thing is this photograph here, and it's a very poignant photograph because of the 1,200 men that would have been standing on parade just prior to going to France in August 1914, by the 11th of November 1914, after the Battle of Blackwatch Corner, there were only 70 men and one officer still left standing. That is including a number of reinforcements that had come through, of which there probably were another couple of hundred. So to see them all standing there and to think that the majority, you know, over 90% of them were either killed or wounded that are in that photo 3 months later is just quite mind-blowing to me. The commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Adrien Duff, and he was unfortunately killed at the Battle of the Aisne as part of the withdrawal. And he was a hugely popular man throughout the army, and he was the man that wrote the manual on how the British Army should deploy to war in, I think it was 1908, 1909. And that manual is what the British Army used to deploy to World War I. He was obviously a future general, and unfortunately he was killed at the Battle of the Aisne, as I said. We've got a few items in this cabinet. There's captured German bayonets and German swords there, as well as German rifles and that as well. The broadsword there, if I remember rightly, Captain Bowes Lyon. He was killed October 1914, and he's important because Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, this was one of her brothers, and he was serving with the 1st Battalion at the time. Her other brother was Fergus Bowesline. He was killed with the 8th Battalion in 1916, I think it was, but don't quote me on that, that date. These two paintings, I think, are very poignant. Two brothers, two young gentlemen, and both killed. That was the Murray Minguses. And they, if you remember earlier on, I was saying about Major Moore, Mingus at Waterloo. Mm-hmm. They were his direct descendants and the last of the male line of the Murrays, the Minguses, which is an awful shame. And this happened to so many families. As well. Chieftains' lines came to an end. For example, the MacLeods, young Ian Breck MacLeod was the last of the male lines, direct male lines of the MacLeods of Dunvegan, and he was an officer in the 1st Battalion. He was killed 1915, I believe, as well.
It seems in the First World War, the 1st Battalion, the Black Watch, got a real battering, because we've seen it there, how you mentioned about the photo. Well, the men, by the time at the end of 1914, let's say 70% of them are gone. Yeah. Then when we move on to later events such as Aber's Ridge, even more of them were killed there. And I remember reading somewhere, and I don't know how true this is, but by the end of the First World War, around 96% of the 1st Battalion, the Black Watch, was of men that had joined after 1916. It just shows you how high the casualty rate was.
What I feel is quite often forgotten, and it did annoy me about the commemorations, was all about the territorial and the PALS battalions and all that. What was forgotten, that in 1914 it was the regular army that was decimated, absolutely wiped out, and it didn't feature in all the commemoration stuff. More worried about the men that came on afterwards. Yet it was, if the regular army hadn't stood, and in 1914, and in particular the first Guards Brigade of the 1st Guards Division, which was 1st Black Watch, the 1st Camerons, I think it was the Connaught Rangers, and Scots Guards, I think it was. I'll probably have those two regiments wrong. But certainly the Black Watch and Camerons, they, on the 11th of November 1914, they fought at Black Watch Corner. If they hadn't stood there, the First World War would have been over on the 11th of November 1914. You can take out of that what you like, but absolutely decimated.
It's true what you're saying, how the earlier part of the First World War is commonly looked over, because when you talk about the First World War, straight away people say the Battle of the Somme and Passchendaele. Those are the two big major battles. But in the 1914, there was these battles that were possibly more important than this, because if the British forces and French and Belgian forces never stood their ground and held these positions, like you say, the war would have been over. Yeah. And it's not just in the Western Europe as well. People are forgetting the fact that there was British forces in Italy as well. Mm-hmm. There was forces in the Balkans. There was forces all over the world, in Africa as well. Yeah.
Fighting in the Pacific, German Western Samoa. The New Zealand forces went there and all their little bits, and they had the raiders going around all over the place. It was and the seas and that. So it was a global war.
I've noticed you've got a couple of your Victoria Crosses on display.
Yeah. Now these are really quite interesting. The first one is David Finlay, up the top, and he was in the 1st Battalion, and he got his Victoria Cross for at the Battle of Rue de Bois on the 9th of May 1915. And he managed to take command of the unit that he was with, and got his boys back to the trench. He picked up wounded, and all this was done whilst under fire. Charles Melvin, he was the 2nd Battalion, and he ended up, and the interesting thing about him was he was actually quite an old man, and compared to everyone else, and he managed to take on a load of Turks, and using his bayonet and basically anything else that came to hand, sort of took a trench area, and you know, looked after his boys as well. And you know, both of them were very modest guys, so I've been told. You know, afterwards, you know, they didn't like being paraded out, and all the rest of it, and that sort of thing. Above it, we've got what's known as the Baghdad Bell, and this was, it came from railway station at Samara, and the 2nd Battalion, because it was obviously them, this used to sit outside the guard room, whereas the 1st Battalion had the cornpoor gong. The 2nd Battalion had this bell, and it would be used for when time was being called, and bugle calls around the barracks, right up to 1956, when the 2nd Battalion was put in suspended animation. This next wee case is interesting. You've got a couple of Bibles there that have bullet holes through them. I'm not sure offhand if the characters had them survive. Yeah, it looks like it. And various types of kit and equipment that the guys were issued, cigarettes. Most people think that this thing number 3 here is a hip flask. It's not, it's actually a water flask. You would carry your water in that when you're going around. See a prismatic compass, and you know, various other items of kit there.
Over here, you seem to have a bit of a sadder story over here relating to a member of the Black Watch. Somehow you have managed to obtain his kilt that was used at the Battle of the Somme, and amazingly it still has the mud of the Somme.
Yeah, it's really quite sad. He, Captain William Stewart, he was with the 1st Battalion and killed on the 25th of September 1916. We're lucky that we've got a photograph of him and wearing the kilt that he had on when he was killed. It's in some cases, because the bodies were able to be recovered, the officers at the time saw fit that the kilt was sent back to the family. And almost, I believe, as soon as the regimental museum was set up at the depot in the 1920s, this was one of the first items that came in. A very, very poignant piece of kit, but we also have the cross that was put up over his grave initially, which also commemorated the other men and officers and men that were killed on that day.
But just looking at the kilt here, you can see the scars from the conflict. There's a section of the kilt here that's missing, a slight tear. You look like you've had a little tear up here as well, possibly getting caught in barbed wire, and if you look carefully as well, you just see minor holes here or there. There's another tear up here as well.
Yeah.
It's just the scars of war. When you compare it to, let's say, your kilt, for example, it's been through hell.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a lot of things that you would catch your uniform on. You know, there'd be nails and the duckboards and the trenches and barbed wire and bits of wriggly tin. And as we still did when I was serving, your combats got ripped. You'd get your needle and thread out and start repairing them with whatever coloured thread there was to hand. You know, to keep it serviceable, and that sort of thing. You can see here the remains of two ribbons, bows on the kilt. I didn't mention before, they were actually very particular to the Black Watch. They were a indication of an officer or a sergeant, an easy, very early 19th century way of being able to tell rank at a distance.
How would you be able to tell the difference from an officer from a sergeant?
Well, that you probably wouldn't, but it just would give the private soldier and the junior NCOs an idea that that's, you know, one of the bosses, so to speak. Probably once you get a wee bit close, you'd see a difference in a load of gold braid in his shoulder or stripes in his arms, sort of thing. Yeah, it was one of these vagaries.
I've noticed over here as well, you've got a cap badge with a bullet hole near enough through the centre of it.
Yeah. I didn't even have to look at this to tell you that had to have happened before mid-1915, because that was when they were still wearing Glengarries. About that time was when they came out with a knitted sort of tea cosy to stick in your head, and that's when they had started using the red hackle just on its own. And then that only lasted for a matter of months, and then they came out with the tam o'shanter, which is a big broad bonnet that we'll see in one of the other cases later on. Yes, I would like to think that this character sort of lived, but looking at where the round has gone through, there's a good chance he possibly didn't.
As well, I've noticed as well, you've got your military cross group, you've got an MM at the back with the Belgian Croix de Guerre. You've got another group here that appears to be a territorial group, reservists, but I don't recognise this award here.
That is the CMG, Colonel Walker. He was a very, very popular officer in the regiment and with the 7th Battalion, which was the Fife Battalion. Yeah, to have gotten the CMG, he must have been very highly thought of. It's very close to, you know, a knighthood and that sort of thing.
Going back, I'm talking to the medals as well. Through collecting, I've met a lot of guys who have said that they don't have any interest in medals when it comes to the collecting, which is fine. Everybody has their own preference, I suppose. But what I think is that there's a lot to medals. It's not just a piece of metal at the end of the day. It's telling a story. Like, for example, when we see this military cross group, he's been awarded the military cross, so he's carried out a bravery action. There's his trio, so he's been in the front since end of 1914, 1915. He's got his defence medal, which means he served during the Second World War as home defence. Then we've got his police constable medal, and straight away from that tells you that after the war he had a career in the police force.
Yeah.
And there you go. This just tells you a big chunk of this man's life just by looking at that.
Yeah, medals are, yeah, just by looking at them, you can, they tell a story. I mean, you know, you've got the men that were in the Boer War previous to the First World War, so, you know, they have theirs on immediately straight away. You can pick up on things. You can, for example, we can tell if a photograph of someone's been in the 2nd Battalion in 1911 because of the Delhi Durbar medal. And, you know, things like that. You know, it's just, they do tell a story, really do tell a story.
As we continue, I've noticed that you've got a collection of items belonging to a soldier over here.
Well, we've got, you remember just previous I was saying about Fergus Bow's lion. Well, that's his service medals there. That's one of the Queen Mother's relatives. And I know, being that I am the piper to the current Earl of Strathmore, that one of the tunes that they love being played is The Flowers of the Forest. The Bowes Lion family, anytime you go and play in front of them, that's one of the tunes that will be asked for. And it all harks back to Fergus and his cousin across there. You see, as we were saying about medals telling a story, you've got the top group there, Military Cross group, and you've got gentleman's been in the Sudan. I would say, just by looking at them, that he's probably come out of the army, then re-enlisted, and he's gone through the First World War, and there's a military service medal in that there as well, which, you know, tells that he'd done a long, long time in the army as well. You know, fascinating things, absolutely fascinating.
At the top of this cabinet here, I've noticed the helmet with the red hackle attached to the Hessian. Would that have been a common thing?
Yeah. It was discouraged by higher ups, but the Highland regiments, you could tell when you were coming up against a Highland regiment because they had on a kilt apron, so straight away. And the thing would be, within a matter of hours, when you moved into the trench, you would know who is across from you. You know, there'd be, Germans did exactly what we did, recce patrols out, see you could work out who they were. They had people that spoke fluent English and that as well, in their units, so they would pick up straight away. And, you know, we're very, very proud of our red hackle, to the point of in Northern Ireland, you would wear, a lot of us kept behind the bulletproof plate that zipped up on your NEBA vest. We would keep a small red hackle in the back of that as a piece of good luck. So yeah, it wasn't uncommon, even right up into the Second World War. They painted red hackles on, and in the 1920s and 30s there was actually a small bracket welded onto or brazed onto the helmet for a red hackle to go into.
I've noticed just behind me as well, we've got an eerie reminder of the First World War and the evolution of the killing machines.
Yes, yeah, it's a gas mask. This is the later type. The initial ones were basically a pad that you would pee on, and it would be strapped around your face to restrict the gas. But they've quickly worked out that the gas got into your eyes, got in your ears, you know, it was, you know, so basically you had to cover the whole head, and it developed into that and into what we know today as a respirator. How effective they were, I honestly don't know. You're dealing with cloths that would be porous, and bearing in mind the gas was heavier than air, settling into trenches, and you're having to stay there for hours and hours and hours on end. I'm just not entirely sure that they were really that effective. Gas casualties, 1917-18, when these were being used, were still, you know, through the roof. So
and the process as well of putting one of these on, it must have been a bit fiddly.
yeah, I'm afraid I don't know too much about it, but yeah, like any sort of respirator, it's trying to get gear off, get things out of bags, get them on within a matter of seconds is not an easy task at all.
And over here as well, there's another eerie reminder of the barbaricness of the First World War, and you've got this mace here. Was maces like this, these customised weapons, a very common sight in the First War?
Yeah, you would use anything. And it's even the same in the Second World War. Shovels, sharpen the ends of your shovels, pick handles, as folk call them, fighting knives, trench knives, which were basically knuckle dusters with a blade on them, and you would fight, in fact, almost in an old Highland way, trench knife and a bayonet. Well, it's like using a broadsword and a dirk. They would make up things out of bits of wood, metal, grenades made out of tins with bolts and stones and anything else they could find in them. You know, ingenuity came into it in a big way.
It's quite a shame the sheer levels that people went to just try and kill somebody else.
Well, it's a matter of kill or be killed.
That's true.
You know, and yeah, when you've been in that situation, it's yeah, to fully understand it, you actually have to have been in that situation to fully understand, you know, the mindset you have to be in.
It's a strange one again, because you're now in a modern conflict. This huge advance in technology, which is causing these massive high casualty rates, like the use of artillery, gas, machine guns especially. Yet there's still things like this going on. This is very medieval. So you've got this crossover in modern warfare, medieval warfare, and somewhat Napoleonic warfare with the tactics that were being used.
Yeah. Well, if you remember the painting, the Battle of Fontenoy, you know, clapping the ground, taking cover. It's the same thing going on, and even though we have all this technology, there has to be some poor soldier has got to stand on that ground with his rifle, and otherwise you have achieved absolutely nothing. So how far have we come in 1,000 years? Not very far at all, really.
I've noticed as well over here, you've got this amazing collection blown into one man.
Yeah, well, he's, you know, we're very lucky to have all this. You know, we've got letters, we've got pay books, we've got Bibles, rosary beads. We've even got his tam o'shanter there, and for this to have survived this long is absolutely amazing. And you know, it's not often that you get full groups of items like this coming in. And yet again, you know, just by looking at it, you can tell a story. You know, is a group. I think it's his brothers. The arrow certainly his relatives. You can tell that he was what faith he was by the rosary beads. You know, the lace handkerchiefs and everything else that he's obviously sent back from France to the family. You know, obviously a very caring family, a great relationship. You know, it's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I've noticed as well that you've also got his diaries also, and this one here that you've got opened up is even himself mentioning about the 11th of November 1918.
Yeah.
Saying that they were just on a march.
Yeah.
Right after it all.
Yeah, a lot of the troops, when it came to the 11th of November, particularly in the British Army, were, you know, static. I do know that the Americans were still carrying out an offensive. I'm not sure what the French were up to, but, you know, they'd sort of come to an agreement, you know, in a lot of cases with the Germans, right, we've got this armistice going to be happening, let's just, you know, make it any worse than it already is. And what we've got to bear in mind as well, there was communications going across the lines, because, you know, they're going about the Christmas truce. There were truces happening all the time to clean up the battlefield. You know, this is something that gets forgotten about as well, to try and keep it free of disease and everything else. There's so many other things that went on. You know, First World War is not a straightforward creature at all.
Over here, Alistair, I've noticed possibly one of the more unique displays of death pennies that I've ever seen in a museum.
Yeah, well, when the original museum, when it was set up, they had a lot of these were given in, and it used to sit in a hallway, and a lot of the times we when we were on a recruiting team, and that would be based out of Balhousie Castle, you would scoot through this hallway as quick as you could, because there was just an eerie feeling about it. But this is only a small selection of what we have, death pennies wise. There's a lot more of them had come in over the years. But these ones, because they were part of the original collection, were put up on display like that. James, we're now in the Second World War part of the museum, and this is the part that deals with the prisoners of war. One bit of the Second World War that's overlooked is the debacle at St Valery-en-Caux. Everyone's fixated on Dunkirk, but they forget that 2 weeks later the British Army was still fighting in France and in and around St Valery, and it was the Highland Division that was still fighting, and there's often a thing made that they were sacrificed. They weren't sacrificed. What happened was, because they were attached to the French army, they were effectively split off when the Germans ran through. So they had to get them away out of a different port. So they made further south from Dunkirk towards St Valery. There were a lot of things that happened that just conspired against them. And it was General Sir Victor Fortune, who was the commander of the Highland Division at the time. And the interesting thing is, if we think back to the First World War, he was the one officer that was left in the 1st Battalion after the battle at Blackwatch Corner. And here he was commanding the Highland Division, and a very, very highly thought of officer he was as well. I've family connections through my wife's family, where two relatives were captured at St Valery with the 1st Battalion and with the Tyneside Scottish at Arras, further north. The POWs were they were very badly treated, which is an understatement, and our cousin Jack referred to the best night's sleep he had was in a pig pen with a big fat sow. You know, they would be fed a potato soup that, you know, a huge cauldron that had one potato in it, sort of thing, and you know, they really suffered something terrible. One of the things that's forgotten about the POWs is they tied up so many German troops, and they did so much to sabotage German industry. If you get a chance to look online, you'll see that there's the intelligence reports that a lot of the POWs filled out, and you see things like the synthetic oil machinery. A spanner would get dropped in, or there'd be sand stuck into the petrol making plant, or there'd be, you know, they wouldn't quite tighten the nuts on something, so it broke, and you know, they would end up with 10 days in solitary confinement, or as in my wife's grandfather's case, you know, they would call out a whole camp on parade, and Gestapo would go along and point out someone. He unfortunately was the tallest man. He was about 6 foot plus, and he was shot through the elbows twice, you know. But they didn't get the recognition that they should have, because of you know, the amount of bother that they caused the Germans. And then the vast majority of them on these 1,000-mile marches. I remember Jack saying that one of his best mates was a guy called Hector, and it bugged him for the rest of his days that he could never remember his last name. He knew he'd been in the Argyll and Southern Highlanders. And they were at about the 800-mile point, and him and Hector sat down at night, back to back, and went to sleep. Unfortunately, Jack was the only one that woke up. You know, it was such a shame that these things happened after going through 5 years as a prisoner and getting so close to being free as well.
It's true what you say. These guys they don't have as much recognition as they truly deserve.
Yeah.
And as you did correctly point out, is that when people think of the early stage of the war, they do think of the glorious evac, Dunkirk, how the civilian boats came over and saved the British Army, but they never think of the rear guard, the people who stayed back.
Yeah.
And it was the same with the French volunteering to remain as the rear guard also, and that attempt of the British and the French try to disperse, try to get to all the neutral territories, and that sheer desperation.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's also forgotten about St Valery is a comment that Charles de Gaulle made. He said that if the 51st Highland Division had not stood at St Valery, he would never have gone to Britain. He would have gone to Vichy. And because they stood and fought shoulder to shoulder with the French there, that was the reason why he got on his Lysander and flew to Britain to form the Free French Forces. Now that's huge. but yet again, it's one of these things that's conveniently forgotten.
I've noticed, Alistair, in the museum as well, you've got a lot of items here relating to the Pacific theatre of the Second World War. What was the 42nd's involvement with that?
Well, our 2nd Battalion went out to India. They'd actually had a bit of a hellish time in the war because they were in British Somaliland. They got kicked out of there. They were on meant to be going to Greece and was sort of on the way there when they diverted to Crete. Got kicked out of Crete. Then were in later in Tobruk, where they did the famous breakout of Tobruk. And then 1943 they were sent to India. They were split into two what were referred to columns, the 42nd column and the 73rd column. And they became part of what was known as the Chindits, the famous long-range sort of patrol group. And their war out in Burma was absolutely atrocious. Absolutely atrocious is the only way I could describe it. They were meant to be resupplied by air quite regularly. A lot of times this didn't happen. The medical cover was whatever the regimental medical officer could carry on mules, and a lot of times I do know of occasions where people had to be shot because they were wounded. It was either that or they would fall in the hand of the Japanese. What's also forgotten is the war in Burma was so close. I was just reading very recently of one officer being shot by a sniper who was 15 yards away, and another officer being shot when he was reporting to the CO, Colonel Green. The sniper was apparently 25 yards away. And that's the distance you're talking about. The pressure these men were under was just unbelievable. There's mentions of suicides and all the rest of it, particularly when men were wounded. And so they fought a hell of a campaign in the Burmese jungle. They were also let down by senior commanders when the American general took over. Was it name I forget presently. He absolutely abused them. They were kept there longer than they should have been. They were already worn out. These men came back having been, fit, very fit men, came out of the jungle. A lot of them had to be invalided out. They were incapable of eating properly. A lot of them looked like they'd been in a concentration camp, Not unusual for some of these guys to be down below 30 kilos. And yet, even though they were in that state, permanent state of dysentery, and they were still fighting the Japanese. And, in the true traditions of the regiment, the final attack they did was led by Piper Bill Lark, and Bill, one of the most gangliest, skinniest guys you could sort of imagine, but he sort of became famous for this. And they're not, as the joke was made by the rest of the guys in that company that he was with, was not sure whether the Japanese were scared of the fact it was the Black Watch or whether it was Bill's playing. And a lot of hand-to-hand fighting. A young captain whose 100th birthday I was lucky to play at, Hugh Dalrymple. Hugh was in the middle of the... He told me the story himself. I knew about it, but he was in the jungle one day, heard a rustle in the bushes, turned around, and here was a Japanese officer. It mattered a few feet away with a samurai sword ready to chop him, and he had his rifle, put it up to block it, and lost all the fingers on his left hand. You know, and Kazovac, virtually nil. But, you know, it was just, yet again, they were the forgotten army. And even now, you know, folk don't write enough about what these guys went through. You know, battles like Kohima and what was it, White Hill, Whitechapel or whatever. You know, just unbelievable.
But this is another part of the war which is near enough entirely overlooked, because when you find out about the Pacific Theatre, it's dominated by the Americans. Yeah, it's always about the Americans. There's hardly anything about the British involvement. When it was just as important, if not possibly more important, than what the Americans were doing.
The Americans would never have succeeded in the Pacific without the Australians in New Guinea and the British and Indian and you know, in the African Caribbean troops as well. I mean, don't forget about them. My God, they were fantastic soldiers and hugely respected by, you know, by each other. In Burma, in Thailand, they tied up so many Japanese that you know, the Americans would never have been able to carry out what they did coming in first. So yeah, but remember, the Americans won the Second World War as well. So.
So Alistair, we are now at the cabinet displaying some of the belongings to Field Marshal Wavell. Can you explain to me who the man was and why he was so important?
Well, Earl Wavell, considered by many to be one of the finest officers of the Second World War. He is hugely overlooked because he would tell Churchill no. He was commander in Mediterranean forces. I know that's not the correct term, but he was commander in Africa in the early stages, and he was removed from there because there wasn't enough action happening. Bear in mind, this man managed to stop the Germans and Italians in North Africa with nothing. And, you know, and Montgomery, you know, everyone goes on about Montgomery in North Africa. Well, I'm afraid the Italians and Germans would have had the oil fields in the Caucasus if it hadn't been for him working with absolutely nothing. And, you know, yet again, all regular army troops that he was using and doing the most phenomenal job. And the measure of the man was that he ended up commanding he was commander in India, commander Far East Forces, and also was made the last proper Viceroy of India. And hugely respected by Gandhi, Nehru, and all of those people. So, and when he died, he was buried in Westminster Abbey. So there are not very many people get to be buried in Westminster Abbey, and a huge funeral whereby his coffin went up the Thames in a barge. You know, these are things that would only happen for royalty. So the most hugely respected and honoured man.
What stands out here for me is, yes, we've got all these displays of these beautiful looking swords, all these awards, his uniform, but what really does it for me is the Christmas letter.
Yeah.
The Christmas card from the King, King George VI.
Yeah.
And that to me shows how well known he was.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, being a senior officer from the Black Watch, he would have had a personal relationship with Queen Elizabeth, as she was then, and therefore, you know, it would be, they would have known each other on first name terms. But he was just such a hugely respected man. I mean, he made Field Marshal. He was made an earl, but not just for him, for his family. And unfortunately, his only son, Archie, second Earl Wavell, was killed in Kenya in 1955, I think it was, 54, 55. And so, therefore, the line ended. But yeah, he was able to do things with nothing. He was able to look forward to how to get things done. I mean, for example, the SAS wouldn't be in existence. It wasn't for him and another Black Watch officer, General Neil Ritchie, who gets castigated a lot of times, and was another one who fell out with Churchill. But yet again, he can't have been that bad, because he had the forethought to start to listen to Sterling and have the SAS started up, you know. So yeah, a fantastic man, and the fact that he had, like I said before, the respect of Gandhi and those folk before Mountbatten took over in India was, you know, I think is the measure of the man.
It's truly an incredible story for an incredible man.
Yes.
So we're now up to the section that covers the Cold War period and the aftermath. Alistair, I noticed that there's a few items in here that relate to yourself.
Yes, James. I enlisted in 1988, and I served 20 years with the Black Watch. And one of my last active deployment was to Iraq on Optelic 1, on the invasion of Iraq, with D Company as Pipe Major of the regiment.
So I've noticed that your helmet's here on display. Is there anything else that's on display here that belong to you?
There's my my rank slide just there, and a couple of items, 59, 60 and 61 there. 58, the armband, because I was commanding a section of armoured ambulances. We were co-located with the companies, because you have once someone has been wounded, you have what you call the golden hour, 59 minutes to get them back. So we were co-located, and it wasn't until after our first few actions where we realised that they weren't fighting quite by the rules they fit in, and so things like Red Cross arm patches and that were stowed away, and all the rest of it. We never quite got around to painting out the red and white cross on my 432, because they were using that as an aiming marker. As being an armoured infantry battalion, we're generally travelling into whatever area that we were going to be hopefully making contact on, in file, so 2 lines, and I was collocated just behind the company commander's vehicle initially. However, that meant that I was attracting a lot of fire, RPG rounds, and we were just very, very lucky that they were firing their anti-armour ammunition at such short distances, 20 metres or so. So it wasn't arming, so it'd be hitting the 432 and bouncing off. And it was fine for the guys in the Warriors because they had the Chobham armour on. Unfortunately, the 432, I just had my inch steel and all the rest of it.
Now I see here as well that you've got a small display dedicated to the Korean War. You've got the North Korean flag, you've got the South Korean flag, you've got this Katra on PPSH. What was the regiment's involvement during this conflict?
Well, the 1st Battalion left Crail in 1952 and sailed out to Korea via Singapore and eventually made it into Busan, I think it was, and they were lucky to be met there by the Argyll Southern Highlanders pipe band. In Singapore they were met by the Gordon Highlanders, so it was quite a trip. And in their regimental magazines you see how this all went on. They became part of the Commonwealth Brigade, British Commonwealth Brigade, and they fought the North Koreans. The biggest battle was a place called the Hook, which was a ridge line that jutted out into, I suppose you call it no man's land, that was on a hook-shaped ridge. When they took over the position from the Americans, the trenches were only waist deep, and so Colonel Rose, first thing he did, well, the company commanders, everyone, as soon as they were there, they started digging proper British Army trenches, fire trenches, slit trenches, you name it, being done on the positions. Wire entanglements had to be built, etc., etc. And they were just lucky that they had enough time to get these built before the Chinese put in a huge attack on them. Probably, 10,000, enemy attacking this position, which initially only had 2 companies on it. An interesting wee story was the pipe major, a fellow called Dick Erickson, who's originally from Dundee. The initial artillery barrage, he was sitting in his fire trench and he always kissed the 2 Highland dancers, pipers, that were sitting either side of him in this 3-man fire trench. And a mortar bomb landed in his lap, took off his leg, took off one of his, all the fingers on one of his hands and all the rest of it. And he said what annoyed him the most wasn't losing his fingers. He said it was the fact the Highland dancers only had burst eardrums. So, great wee story. But, yeah, so the Chinese managed to get onto the position and were overrunning it. And Colonel Rose had to call down artillery fire on top of the position, so right on top of his own men. But he had this planned if this was going to happen. And Colonel Rose had formerly been one of the leaders of one of the Chindit columns in the Second World War. Yet again, a huge forward-thinking man, and that as well. And that cleared the position initially, and then meant that reserve companies and all the rest of it could get onto the position and push the Chinese off. And so that was November 1952. And after that, there was a number of smaller actions that the 1st Battalion took part in. It was yet again one of these formative wars as far as kit goes, because Korea is very, very cold in winter. And it meant that winter clothing was something that had to be developed very, very quickly. It was guys would wake up and they were frozen to the ground, and this sort of thing. And I think they lost a lot of men with cold injuries and hypothermia. So, and how we were talking before about the First World War room, about using anything that came to hand.
Yep.
That spade is a case in point. Now you can see the ends of it have been sharpened and all the rest of it. And the Chinese would use anything that they had as well, because they didn't give every man a weapon. Someone got killed in front of you or went down, you picked up his weapon, and otherwise was fighting with bits of, sticks with barbed wire wrapped around them and all sorts of things. So it was very much, the warfare still hadn't changed.
And quite desperate at some points as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. You think of the Gloucesters at the Imjin River, and the Black Watch at the Hook, and then some of the things that the South Korean Army had to go through. It was hugely desperate, and resupply was a big problem as well.
Alistair, this room is totally unique from what I've seen in the past. I've just totally full with names. So, what is the purpose of this room?
This is a memorial room. It has the names of all the soldiers that we know of that were killed from 1914 right up to 2006 when the regiment was amalgamated. There are tens of thousands of names, believe it or not, here. So it's just quite amazing when you're standing here. And we've got seats in here as well, folks sort of can sit and sort of take it in as well. And we have a copy of the statue memorial that was raised at Blackwatch Corner a few years ago in France, and one of the Powrie Bray memorial at Dundee to the 4th and 5th Battalions as well. So it's for a small space, it is very poignant. Very poignant.
You've got the portrait here in the background. I just think it goes so well with each other. It just really gives you that sense of sacrifice.
Yeah, no, I think it does. It's quite an amazing space, and with the books here, with the wee bit more detail in them, it gives if, you know, like you were saying about your relative Charles Stewart, if you had first come in here and suddenly went, oh, Uncle Charles was killed in the Black Watch, you could look for there, and then it leads you on to the speaking to the archive team and seeing how much we can find out about them and as well.
So is it possible for people to come forward to the Black Watch and ask their assistance to research their family members?
Oh, yeah. I actually help out on that team as well as a volunteer. Either email or phone, or even if you come in, someone from the team, someone from upstairs will come down and you know, take the details, and we will try and find out as much as we can. Sometimes it can be a bit disappointing, you know, there isn't much there. Other times there's screeds and screeds, but that's just the nature of an archive. And you know, we're lucky that you can refer to various organisations now, National Army Museum, or there's the various websites that, you know, can refer to and build the whole story as much as we can. And that's what this museum is about, is remembering the history of the Black Watch, which next year will be coming up to 300 years since the founding of the independent companies. And it's to do with the welfare of those men that are still alive now and need a hand, and remembrance is the big thing. I was in Monte Cassino earlier on this year for commemoration of Amazon Bridge, where the 6th Battalion were the first across Amazon Bridge in 1944, and the Pipe Major was killed. And I'm lucky enough, I'm actually managed to get contact with the family, and we've managed to pull together a load of photographs that the family didn't have before. You know, these sort of connections that can be made, you know, through welfare and remembrance.
It's a fantastic way to remember them all.
Yeah, I think it is.
Alistair, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us about some of the items, as well as the fantastic history of the 42nd. I'm going to have to leave you just now, because I've heard there's a special treat waiting for us upstairs. So again, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us.
My pleasure, James. Absolute pleasure.
So, we've got a very interesting item here that was recently discovered. Ginat, would you mind telling us something a wee bit about this? How did you come by finding it?
Yes, of course. So hello everybody, my name is Ginat and I'm the collections assistant at the Black Watch Museum. One part of my job is actually doing a collection review, which is actually going through the whole collection that we have in the museum. Now I came across this cape, and initially I thought that it had mold on it, but then taking it outside to have a better look at it, I understood that actually this is not mold but blood stains. Now this sparked my attention, and I really wanted to do some research to understand who wore this cape, when he wore it, and what does it mean. And I gave this project to one of our volunteers, and he just made a magnificent research about this, and it gave us a full picture of one soldier's life in the army.
So Donald, you're the man that's been able to reveal the story behind this cape. What was the purpose of this cape? Was it a sort of rain jacket? Was it a gas cape? What kind of cape is it?
Well, we didn't know. And our original idea was that it might be a gas cape, because you see the pictures of the guys with that, you know, over, and the kind of ground sheet just made into something that will maybe protect them to some degree. But when you look at it more carefully, it has a lot of pockets. It's really quite a complex garment. And so it didn't seem to make much sense that it would be a gas cape. But nevertheless, there's all this damage as if somebody has been in the trenches and has been splattered with blood, not just once, but from all sides. And down here, actually a real concentration, as if he's tried to drag somebody around, or he's had somebody actually impressing himself on him. On the inside as well, there is no blood. So it doesn't seem as if he actually was shot. So we looked into the whole gascape thing, and that seemed unlikely, and looked into where else he might have used this. Now, we knew that he had been in Mesopotamia later in the war, but it seemed highly unlikely you would take a thing like this to Mesopotamia. So that seemed out, although what we discovered about him in Mesopotamia was very interesting, because he was a cipher officer and involved in quite secret stuff, I think, later on in the war. The other option was that maybe it was something he would have worn in the Second World War, because he was active in the Second World War as one of the pioneer corps, and he was operational there in Brittany at the time that the Germans were pushing the British forces out of Brittany. So he would have been involved in heavy stuff there, and maybe we thought then. And then finally, of course, the most obvious thing would be that it was First World War in the trenches where he was, and we know that he was there in 1916 at the beginning of the Somme. What finally made us sure about what it was actually a label. And we'll maybe be able to look at the label later on. There's a label in there from the manufacturers of this cape, and the label's dated, well, it doesn't have a date on it, but we tried to date it and looked through the company, the records of the company that made the cape, and found that they operated in a certain area of Edinburgh in 1906, and then they moved to a different place after that. The address that's on this label is the 1906 address. So we took it from that this cape was made round about 1906 or thereabouts, and that meant that the cape was probably a First World War cape and something that he had taken to Flanders. And as an officer, he would have bought this himself and worn it, and the pockets and all that inside, that would make sense if he was doing that. So it seems that he went to Flanders with this cape. He wasn't actually involved in trench warfare a great deal. He had various issues that led him not to be doing that. But by the time he did get into the trenches, this disaster happened that led to all the blood and led to him actually being invalided out with shell shock, actually. His story as far as the war altogether is concerned is that I believe this is quite a common thing, that as a family, somebody coming from a family of officers and a kind of county family and so on, he would have expected to go into the World War I as an officer. But I don't think there was space for all the officers who were willing to go. So a number of them went in initially as privates, and that's certainly what he did, to the Cameron Highlanders, and he was there for a year. But having been with them for a year, he got his commission with the Black Watch, but he got sent out to Flanders and, ironically, got stopped from carrying on to the trenches because he had an illness, and he was hospitalised for 2 weeks, and the illness was German measles. So he couldn't fight the Germans because he had German measles. He then went into the trenches, but only for 2 sessions of a week before he was ill again. And in that second illness was a flu. And this was interesting too, because Spanish flu at that time was not recognised as such. The Americans gave it, well, not the name, but the Americans recognised it in 1917 or so on. But this was 1916. But there are papers now being written where doctors are looking back and they're saying the flus that were going around in the spring of 1916 probably were Spanish flu. He was hospitalised for 3 months. So it seems as though he had Spanish flu before anybody really knew that Spanish flu existed. So when he came back at the beginning of the Somme to rejoin his regiment and to rejoin his company, D Company, he had very little experience really of trench warfare, and he ended up being involved in this attack, but his company whereas others succeeded fairly quickly, had a lot of trouble. And they were attacking up a trench when a strong point started shelling them, and they got trapped there. So the company was reduced at that point from whatever it would be, 200 men or something, to 33, and only one officer left, and that one officer was him. So we think all of this would have happened at that point, and that he would have been there, and shells would have been landing for hour upon hour, causing the splashes of blood, and then maybe he was trying to drag people out or whatever. At the end of that, the Seaforths were sent up to reinforce them, but I think all that did was crowd the trench more and made it more deadly for everybody. It wasn't until a Stokes gun got brought up in the evening that they were able to get rid of this strong point and then get people out. He was almost immediately invalided out, and we have the note from the medical officer to say that he was being invalided out with shell shock. And again, this seems really interesting. Again, he was early with Spanish flu, but he was very early with shell shock, because the Lancet had mentioned shell shock in 1915. This is 1916, and somebody's writing on a little note shell shock and sending him off. Craig Lockhart wasn't in place. Nobody was really aware, I don't think, to a great degree of shell shock at this point. So, first with Spanish flu, and the first with shell shock.
Can I just ask a wee quick question here? How did the museum actually come by obtaining this? Do we know how?
Well, it's come in a number of different batches from his family. He didn't have any children himself, but he had a very close relationship business-wise with somebody. And then in the next generation, sorry, that was wrong. He did. He had a son. And it was his son and this business associate who started donating stuff to the museum. But the son ended up in a care home, and the friend kept going through the material. They had works somewhere, and they had a lot of the material just stored in this place, so it was loads and loads of material sitting there. And this man has gone through it, and gradually, as he's gone through it, donated the bits and pieces to us. But this had been sitting in the store here before either Ginat or myself were here, and she found it in there, you know, and was astonished.
And you're the man that's able to share its story.
To try and find out what was going on, and there's still so many interesting things about it to be pursued. You know, it's I stopped about a year ago and started doing other things, but seeing all the material round about here again, thinking about it, I'd quite like to get back into it again and answer some of the questions that.
It's just one of those questions. What happened? How's this happened? Has it been the result of a shrapnel hitting men and splatters going from the men with all this here?
Yes.
Or like you've mentioned with the big concentrations here,
That's right.
has it been someone that you've been trying to assist?
Yes.
Or it's just one of these things we'll might never unfortunately know?
And in a lot of ways it's quite good not to know, because all the options are all possibilities, and the men that were wearing these things and this was happening to went through all of them. And also that it takes in the possibility of the other parts of the war that he was involved in, and you know, whether there was a possibility of that.
Also, this just shows you how chaotic the First World War was like in the
Yes.
trenches. And that he says this is a guy that didn't have really much experience in the trenches, so for this to be one of his first main experiences for him to end up in this condition, it's no real surprise that he ended up with shell shock.
With the shell shock. And I believe that the shell shock can be all that, the explosions and all the rest of it, but also what you have to do yourself. And if he was having to deal with that situation, and he was the only officer left, and all the responsibility of that, no doubt there was an element of that as well that it affected him.
So, Donald, can you point out where D Company was at the time?
Well, altogether the attack was on this village here, and D Company were on the right wing of this attack. So they were pushing up, I think, I can't say for definite, but I think they were pushing up in this kind of direction, like this. And then they found this trench, and they started working their way and bombing their way is the expression that was used in the diaries, up this trench until at some point they got stuck because this building here, this farm, had been turned into a strong point by the Germans, and they were shelling from here, and they were the Montgomery and his men were then trapped. The other officers, one disappeared, another couple were injured, one died on the scene and he knew about that, and so by the stage of them being stuck there, he was left as the man in command.
So these are items here relating to Montgomery?
Yes, all of them are, and some of them we're still slightly researching and trying to work out about, for example, this book as to when exactly the material here was produced and who by and how they were related to Montgomery. But 3 of them, I think, stand out as being related to his story in terms of the Cape. And this one in particular is the note that the medical officer sent at the time that Montgomery was first diagnosed with shell shock. And I think to have a note dated 1916 in which a medical officer is saying that, the 14th of July 1916, is really quite an unusual thing to have. And again, something that would be worthy of further research. This photograph here comes from his time in the Second World War in Brittany. And he's pictured here with a number of other officers in what looks like a restaurant or hotel, with one man in the front dominating the photograph. If you turn it over, it's labelled General de Gaulle. We know that de Gaulle was in Brittany at the same time as Montgomery, and we know that de Gaulle had to escape to Britain. People won't believe me that this might be de Gaulle because they say he's in a British uniform and so on, but it seems to me possible. We don't know what went on at that time. It was a few days when everything was being kept secret. So why would it not be? And if it's not de Gaulle, why is it his name on it? We've got a larger version of that picture, so it was obviously very important to Montgomery.
And that's it. Thanks for joining us as we discuss the history as well as showing some of the items from the history of the Black Watch Regiment. We hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure that you like, comment and subscribe for more.